Iowa State may have earned its sixth win and snapped its four-game losing streak on Saturday, but I think the biggest takeaway is that Iowa State is back and better than ever.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now the number one sports podcast network. I'm your host, Nick Morovitz. Thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know. Be sure to hit subscribe down below so we can prove that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state. Today, we're talking first about how Iowa State defeated TCU. Yes, but this is not a game that I think Iowa State wins 9 times out of 10, especially over the last 4 weeks, of course, but over the last few years even. It feels like this was an improbable win and a sign of great things to come for Iowa State. Then in the second segment, we're going to talk about the newcomers. And I know it's not really new anymore. These guys have been on the team for a while, but the transfer portal, the guys from the transfer portal made a big difference against TCU. So we're going to highlight them, yes, but we're also going to talk about the relationship between Iowa State and the transfer portal moving forward in the second segment. Then finally, as promised, in the third segment, we're going to talk about Taylor Mauser and the offensive play calling for Iowa State, especially in this win over TCU. But as a whole, can't wait to get into all of that. But first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. Iowa State defeats TCU 20-17. As we talked about this last weekend, historic, enormous win for Iowa State, of course. But I went back and rewatched it. And when you rewatch a game, you feel differently than when you watched it the first time. Okay, I find that to be so interesting, which is why I partially love rewatching games, especially for Iowa State when I know that they won, right? That is so much more fun rewatching. The stress just isn't there. And without that stress, when I rewatched this game, all I could think was, man, this just feels like a game that Iowa State would traditionally lose. And the biggest point in this game that I thought that was when TCU went up 17-6. Remember, when I was watching this game live, I tweeted out from Nick_Marv on Twitter, this just feels like a game that Iowa State's going to win. It just something about it, something about the aura, the energy around this team on the field. I just felt it, I could just tell. But when I rewatched it and I didn't have that emotion, I was immediately upon TCU scoring and going up 17-6. I was like, man, this just feels like typical Iowa State. Very good first half, unraveling in the second. Iowa State's going to give this away. You had a chance against a very good TCU team. You had the lead. You scored. There's all of these things. And then now all of a sudden TCU scores. It's 17-6. It's a 2-score lead. You do have the ball, but what are you going to do with it type of situation? It's the fourth quarter. It just didn't feel like a situation Iowa State would traditionally win in. Yet they did. They went down, drove the field, scored a touchdown on an 11-play, 75-yard drive, and then everyone knows about the Aiden Flora punt return touchdown. And that was, of course, the score that put Iowa State ahead and sealed the deal. But the drive that Iowa State put together offensively was very notable to me because it was 11 plays. It was 5 minutes long. It was 75 yards. But there were 3 specific plays in there that, to me, just don't normally go Iowa State's way. Long run from Rocco, the Carson Hansen long run, and of course, the Chase Sowell catch on the goal line. Not a touchdown, but to get them the first down inside the 5 or whatever it was. Those 3 plays specifically, of course, obviously highlights and whatnot, but they don't generally happen at the end of a game when Iowa State needs them, at least not over the last 4 weeks, for sure. But even over the last few years, maybe excluding last year, it feels like Iowa State hasn't really been able to put those drives together at the end of games. So obviously that'll go into the conversation we have in the third segment. But for now, the point I want to highlight is that this team will not give up. And that's what makes this team so dangerous. That's what makes this organization so dangerous. When we talk about, where the coach is at, where the player leaders at, yada, 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 this game shows it just exactly what they're doing, essentially, because I think a lot of teams would be, you're 5-0 to start the season, then you drop to 4 or 5-4, right? 4 straight losses. You're on the road. You're down 11 now. You're going into a bye week. Everyone is injured on the defensive side of the ball. Everyone across the team is, hurt or at least feeling the season in some capacity. I think a lot of teams, I'm not calling anyone out here. I'm just saying that it's human, mentality to be like, all right, let's just get to the end of this one. Let's get to the bye week. Obviously we want to get to the bowl game, but we've got 2 more games to do that. This game has just not gone our way, yada, yada, yada. Not saying that even is the case. I do think Iowa State played pretty well throughout the course of this game, but all right, we're letting this one slip. We're not going to get it here, whatever. That's not the mentality that this coaching staff had. That's not the mentality that these players had. And you obviously can see that with the win, but I think that just shows what this program is made of. It shows what Matt Campbell has made this program. As far as this team is better than ever, yes, they are better than they are over the last 4 weeks. But I think the biggest point is they are dangerous because Kansas and Oklahoma State, no, they're not competing for a Big 12 title. Okay, those teams they're out of it, right? We're not necessarily ruining anyone's season the way Kansas did last year, but those teams aren't going to etch an easy W into their schedule to end the season. This is an opportunity for Iowa State to snag 2 wins to become 8-4, which I don't think anyone saw coming after the 4th straight loss to Arizona State. I think this is a great opportunity. You talk about momentum, right, in the bowl game, whatever. These last 3 games are really where Iowa State, I think, can gain momentum, and I think they're very capable of doing that. I talked about how capable this offense should be, and honestly, it's amazing how well this defense is playing. They have the capability. They have the talent. It comes down to the mental, and we saw against TCU that the mental is there. Whether it's coming from the players, like the player leaders, the guys who are stepping in, the coaches, the assistant coaches, whoever it is that is instilling this mentality, it is very evident that Iowa State is not rolling over, right? And I think, to add to my earlier point, the reason it would be so easy to roll over is Iowa State went to the Big 12 championship game last year, went 5-0 to start this season. The expectation on some level, even though Matt Campbell will never say it, Taylor Mauser will never say it, John Haycock will never say it, Jamie Pollard might not even say it. On some level, there was an expectation of we're going back to the Big 12 championship game. And I'm sure Rocco felt that way. I'm sure Bramer felt that way. I'm sure guys like Bacon, obviously from last season, there is an expectation, a level of we're going back. And they fumbled it all away over not over the TCU game, but over the 4 weeks prior. The 4 games prior, I guess is a better way to put it. It would be so easy to feel like you come up short on the season. And that's the mentality that Matt Campbell talks about. We don't really have goals going into the season. We're more so worried about, the next day, daily habits. If, you go down, go down Otz's route, right? More so about the next snap, the next 40 minutes or the 60 minutes, that's more where Iowa State's mind is at, as opposed to let's make the Big 12 championship game. And I think you're seeing that here. This game, this was grit. I cannot believe Iowa State won this game after rewatching it. Live in the moment, I was sure. I was like, yeah, Iowa State's going to win this game. I feel it. I know it. Rewatching it, I was like, I cannot believe. I genuinely cannot believe that they got that done. Yes, the Aiden Flora touchdown was enormous. But that drive that Iowa State put together to make it 12-17 because of the 2-point conversion, but 12-17, that drive just screams this team is not giving up, and this team is showing signs of life down the stretch and what they can be next season. This team is much better than their 0-4 record over the 4 weeks prior, which is exciting and I think is very good news for all Iowa State fans out there. Now, let's take a closer look at some guys that made a huge difference in this win over TCU. We'll do that coming up right here after this. The holiday season is right around the corner, and that means that it's time to get your home ready. I've got some smelly pine cones going. Really adds to the ambiance. Whether you need more seating for guests, cozy new linens, or a fun serveware for holiday hosting, Wayfair's Black Friday sale is here to help you make your space shine. And the best part, you don't have to wait. Wayfair's Black Friday deals are happening all month long with up to 70% off everything from sofas to spatulas. I couldn't believe how fast everything shipped, and just in time for the holidays. Browsing through their site, it's easy to find pieces that actually fit my style. So nothing generic, just quality designs that feel personal. If you've ever hosted family for the holidays, you know how much a difference a few new touches can make. Everybody notices, and Wayfair makes that easy. Don't miss out on early Black Friday deals. Head to wayfair.com now to shop Wayfair's Black Friday sale for up to 70% off. That's WAYFAIR.com. Sale ends December 7th. Iowa State defeated TCU, yes, but there were some huge names that made a massive impact on this game, and we are going to highlight them right here, right now on Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, now the number one sports podcast network. A couple names that came to mind immediately, obviously, the first one being Trey Bell, and I want to give a huge shout out to Trey Bell because, partially because during the offseason, when it was announced that Trey Bell would be making his transfer over to Iowa State, it was a name that I immediately latched onto. It was a name that I was very excited about. And there were a few of those names. Some names I think have probably performed better than others, but that's not anything against those guys. It might just be a situational thing. But Trey Bell being so successful for Iowa State, I think is super neat, right? Like it's cool to see somebody transfer in, from Lindenwood and see success at the Power 4 level. And against TCU, boy, Trey Bell really balled out. Did have the interception early, as we saw, and obviously had the forced fumble late, right? That was kind of the two big moments. And I would argue that the fumble, the forced fumble late had a much bigger impact on the day, but I could see, obviously setting the tone early, stopping, TCU from getting out ahead. You could make the argument for either one. But Trey Bell also had 5 total tackles, 3 solos in this game. And Trey Bell has been asked to step up into this situation much quicker than I think a lot of people probably would have expected him to. We're kind of, or maybe even that he was expecting to. The injuries in the secondary for Iowa State have been quite ridiculous. And the fact that Trey Bell has just taken on that load and really excelled in that role has been exciting for Iowa State. A very bright spot in that secondary. Not obviously the only name, but since he was a transfer, I wanted to point him out specifically. And obviously I'm going to call it 2 turnovers for Trey Bell. I mean, obviously the interception you can't deny, but he forces the fumble. It doesn't go into his stats in the box score here. It's not it's not a recovered fumble for him, so it doesn't really count, but he forced that fumble. He's the reason that TCU did not score on that drive, and that I think is in a lot of ways the reason that Iowa State, not the only reason, but a lot of the reason that Iowa State won this game. The other name that I'm going to highlight really quick is Chase Sowell. 4 receptions, 31 yards, along of 12 in this game. Now, I can hear what you're saying. Chase Sowell did have, pretty notable drop, but redeemed himself immediately after. So I'm going to kind of let that go. There were a few. I was actually surprised at the amount of people that were calling for Chase Sowell to basically take a seat. I don't think that's necessary. I think Chase Sowell has a ridiculous ceiling, as we saw specifically against Arizona. And that's I took a look at the last few games. Chase Sowell has been towards the top of the reception chart for Iowa State. Against Arizona State was the leading receiver with 6 receptions on 85 yards, or 85 yards on 6 receptions, I guess is how you would say it. So the leading receiver there had a long of 35. Wasn't quite as, huge against BYU or even Colorado. Cincinnati, not quite as enormous. No, closer with 5 receptions and 58 yards, but the 3 games after that were a little bit different. Anyway, Chase Sowell has kind of made himself the wide receiver for Iowa State. Not necessarily the only wide receiver, but he has stepped up into that role. And that was really the question mark going into this season, was who is going to fill that role? And will it be the tight ends or will it be a wide receiver? Mauser, we'll talk about him in a second, has kind of bounced around with, it seems like, where his target share is supposed to go, where Rocco's supposed to throw the ball. But when Chase Sowell gets the opportunity, it feels like he's able to step up. Does he every single time? No, but none of the Iowa State wide receivers have this season. And so I just wanted to take a second and say that obviously what Chase Sowell did, the massive catch on the touchdown drive following TCU going up 17-6 is the moment when I was like, all right, now we got to talk about it. Because, yeah, the redemption after the drop was great. I know it felt very good for him. Obviously, celebrating the first down was kind of just like one of these, like, all right, first down. I'm glad I did that. Let's move on. That was kind of, you could tell that there was a moment of like, all right, we're all right. And kudos to Rocco for throwing it right back to him, trusting his guy. So that is kind of what I wanted to talk about, was those two specific guys, Trey Bell and Chase Sowell. Not the only two transfers that made a difference, not the only two players that showed up for Iowa State, but two guys specifically that I thought played really well in this game. Yes, there's always room for improvement, but nonetheless, this is a perfect segue into the conversation of how does Iowa State treat the transfer portal moving forward? And I personally am of the camp that it is imperative that Iowa State uses the transfer portal to see success. Now, you're going to see, in my opinion, or in my prediction, is you're going to see Iowa State target a lot of smaller school guys like Trey Bell, like Chase Sowell, East Carolina, Lyndon Wood, those type of players that show promise. Even Tomatoa McDonough from Yale show promise at a different level, and then coming into the Power Four, potentially it could carry over. That's what I'm guessing we'll see. And that's not necessarily a bad plan, especially when you look at like rev share and how much of those guys going to be paid, as opposed to bringing in some guy from Alabama, right? Like, it's going to be different. The amount that they're going to be paid, everything about all of those situations entirely different. And so I'm not saying that Iowa State shouldn't target those smaller school guys, or bring them up from the lower ranks whenever you see high level talent, because we know that high level talent exists at those lower levels, and we've known that for years. Obviously, it's easy to look. I don't even need to name any of the names. When you think of like a D2 or a G6 school that has high talent, maybe not D2. There are some D2s, but some guys who were in the NFL and played ridiculously well at a G6 school or G5 school or whatever, you can think of at least one name, right? It's not that it hasn't existed, and even more so now with the transfer portal and with the whole basically college football landscape. There is so much talent at that second level that I'm not blaming Iowa State for doing that. But I would like to personally see Iowa State try to get a big splash name in the transfer portal. I understand that puts a ton of strain financially on the program, and maybe that's just not a smart move, and that's why I don't have the position of making those decisions. But I think that would help Iowa State in a lot of different ways. I think obviously if he translates over to more winning, great. Like, that's only a good thing. The more Iowa State wins, the better. And we'll talk about that probably tomorrow, specifically when it comes to like bowl season and where Iowa State is at now versus the past, and yada, yada, yada. If you have any comments on that, put them in the comment section below, or at Nick_Marvin. I can touch on those tomorrow. But as far as, a big name coming to Iowa State, and I'm not saying we got to get like Tom Brady in the house, but not only targeting lower level schools, I think would be good for Iowa State for, yes, if they win, but also if they're able to develop this, kind of level of, all right, if you're not succeeding on the level you want to at another Power 4 school, be it Big 12, be it ACC, be it Big 10, be it SEC, wherever it is, if Iowa State is able to develop this track record and show, other, guys in the transfer portal from across the league, that if you go from a Power 4 school where maybe you're not getting the playing time or the development, that you want, you can come to Iowa State. You can see playing time, make an impact. Whether or not Iowa State is winning, it can almost be removed from this equation because you're seeing more playing time and you are seeing more development. The amount of Iowa State guys in the NFL as opposed to the last, over the last 10 years, as opposed to the years prior, is ridiculous. It's not even hardly a comparison. I know that Iowa fans are going to bring up the ridiculous number of guys they have in the NFL. Not really part of this conversation. The amount of guys from Iowa State in the NFL is growing. And so if Iowa State is able to develop this concept of, all right, you're not getting the playing time you want at a different university that you went to go to the NFL, you can come to Iowa State. You'll play more. We will develop you into an NFL level player. And as that trend continues, you start bringing more and more guys in from bigger markets, from bigger schools that have higher talent, ceiling potentials. Not that you can't find those guys at the lower levels too, but at bigger schools, they're there for a reason, right? And then you develop this like, okay, now we've got high level talent year over year over year, and Iowa State starts to push itself up to the top of the Big 12, which I think it's already very, very close to. So to put it all in a bow, as far as Iowa State in the transfer portal, you can bring guys up from lower levels. There is a ton of talent there, and we're seeing that on this team. Not saying that that's not the case, but if Iowa State is able to bring in a guy or two from Power 5 or Power 4 schools, across the SEC, the Big 10, other Big 12 schools, the ACC, whatever it is, and you're able to develop, create this pipeline essentially of you're not happy there, but you're only there for going to the NFL. Well, you can go to the NFL and you can do other things here. And this is a great place to play. I think Iowa State would benefit from that. And I can see the comments. I'm going to make this point quick. Going with just the route of bringing in guys from high school and developing them, I don't think is the way for Iowa State. It's a selling point. It's something that Iowa State does very, very well, but I think you will be left behind if you go that route. I can see why it's a selling point. I see why Matt Campbell goes that route. I have no problem with that, but I think you will be left behind, especially Iowa State, in the money market that we're in with the whole Board of Regents thing. That's going to play a role into both sides of this equation. I don't have enough time to break it down right now, but I think you will be left behind if you try to go that route. I think you have to get talent in transfer portal, whether it's tier 2 or tier 1 or whatever. I just think they just have to. They absolutely have to. All right, let's switch gears and talk about the offensive performance against TCU, because Taylor Mauser has been getting on my nerves, to say the least. Coming up right here after this. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So Iowa State finally won a game, defeats TCU 20-17. But those 20 points came in a very non-traditional way. So we have to talk about the offense here. Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now the number one sports podcast network. This is something that we've brought up multiple times over the last few weeks. Taylor Mauser, I have no specific beef with him. I want to make that very clear. And I am not calling for his job. I've had this conversation on here and I've said, I want to see change. I don't necessarily want to see him gone. I'm not saying that any one person doesn't deserve to have a job. I think Taylor Mauser is very capable of being an OC, and we've seen a lot of flashes, which is what makes me so excited about him. But we've also seen what would be the opposite of a flash, just a trip and a stumble so many times this season. So many times. I just went through and cleaned off my desk. I have sticky notes everywhere, little notes that I write down. Notes during games, during recaps, whenever I'm writing this stuff down. And almost every time I write down something, every game I'm writing down, what was this play? What's happening here? Why is the biggest question that I keep coming back to. And I'm upset that I cleared off my desk because I'd be able to just read through them all. But against TCU, there were a handful of plays. And we're not going to go through every single one because you watched it too, and you could easily go back and watch it if you want to. This is a more broad brush conversation. But I mean, what happened on that first BAT? I just against was that Arizona? I think it was against Arizona. We went for too early. I understand that Iowa State's kicking situation was not ideal. You had Kyle Conradi out there. What's the deal? Is Kyle Conradi hurt? Is that why we decided to go for 2 there? Did you want to get the jump early? And this is coming from the guy who wants Iowa State to score as many points as possible. It's like when you play Madden or when you play college football. There is an element of the fake PAT is a boom or bust play, right? It feels like you either have a 90% or a 10% chance of completing the play when you run actual fake PAT. Right? Not just go for 2. If you wanted to go for 2, go for 2. I believe going into this game, Iowa State was 4 for 4 on 2-point conversions. Just go for 2. How we're getting from point A to point B is more my problem than Iowa State going for 2 on the first touchdown of the game. Taylor Mauser, it feels like every now and then, and I said this, I actually tweeted this, it feels like I can tell when Taylor Mauser's like, all right, we've done enough like normal play calling, strategic approach. I want to run this play. Let's run it. It feels like that sometimes in games. And sometimes it is in the middle of the field on like a random second down. But more times than not, it feels like it's in big, high pressure situations, need to have it third downs, need to have it fourth downs, that we're running some wild play, obviously on a PAT, snap the ball while Kyle Conrad is looking like he's getting ready. Is the thought process that TCU is just like hanging out until Kyle Conradi's taking his steps? They're all in, like, their hands are in the dirt. I don't they're not down there just having a tea party. We're bringing tight ends into motion and surprise QB sneaks with a tight end. I guess I can kind of see the vision, but Iowa State's capable. We've seen this. The only quote unquote trick play that I was a fan of was the fourth down conversion late in the game, where Rocco ran basically it was a fake handoff bootleg, and nobody saw that coming. I was a fan of that one, but that was still like a pretty traditional play. It's just literally a bootleg. And when I was in YSF, we were unable to stop the bootleg, even if we knew it was coming. Like, that's just a traditional play. It is a fake, yes, but on some level, it's not like some weird motion, double pass, handoff, reverse. What are we doing? So, yes, I love Mauser. I do. But there are a handful of plays, it feels like, in every game that you can tell Mauser just wanted to see basically what would happen, which I don't love. It's fine, especially if you're winning in these games, but we're calling them when we're losing or very early on in the game. So look, I'm not an OC. I understand that. I just personally would like Iowa State to run more. I don't know how else to say this other than like true football plays. Like, we don't need to run the craziest misdirection of all time. Well, let's just line them up and run them over. Remember what TJ Otzelberger was saying ahead of the Creighton matchup? Like, we're not going to run. We're not trying to fake people out. We're just trying to play better than the other team. We don't really care if they have tape. And you got to remember, all this is coach speak, so I don't know how true this is, but it does apply to this Iowa State football team. We don't need to trick them. Let's just go out there and run plays. Let's just go out there and play offense. I'm not saying that Taylor Mauser needs to be gone, but there were a handful of plays in this one. Like, what do we have? We have Alex Mansky and Connor Moberly both running QB powers. Why? The question for me is why. If you can answer why, and I would be happy to have this conversation. I am not trying to hate. I am not. I just am confused. If you can answer the why, I will respect it. But, like, what are we doing? We see one massive run from Rocco, and then we run two, backup and third string quarterback powers. One of them on 2-point conversion. We got the 2-point conversion later when we basically just ran an offensive play. That's my point. We don't need some, Connor Moberly weird swinging gate quarterback power, which looked like it actually might have worked. But why did we even run that? That was my question. So I have no problem with, Taylor Mauser. I love the guy. I love his story. I love what he's about. I think he's a perfect fit for Iowa State football. I want to be very clear. But some of the decisions he's making are making me go, what are we doing? Why did we run that? It feels like we just threw it down into the wind. Like, you remember against Arizona State when we decided to spike it on first down? I was like, that maybe is one of the worst decisions ever. It feels like randomly we'll have a play where it's just like, yeah, let's just spike it. Okay. Whatever, I guess. We won the game, and that's what really matters at the end of the day. We scored 20 points, albeit a very unconventional way to get to that number. We did score 20 points, and TCU scored 17. 20 is more than 17. That's a win. And really, at the end of the day, that's really all that matters, especially when you snap a 4-game losing streak. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you guys so much for watching or listening till this point in the episode. You're the GOAT. You really are. I appreciate you more than you know. Until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.